Welcome back to Crawford-Clark Close-Up's Halloween horror season. In part one of our Halloween series retrospective, we gave our thoughts on the first 5 films in the series, from Carpenter's seminal original up to the below-par Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. In this part 2, we'll be covering the following 5 films from 1995's Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, up to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from 2009. We begin where we left off, with Michael Myers having evaded capture once again, having been broken out of jail by a mysterious black-coated man, and young Jamie Lloyd's desperately anguished cries of hopelessness. It would be 6 years before we'd see another Halloween instalment, the same lengthy gap as we'd seen between the critical flop Halloween 3 Season of the Witch in '82 and Halloween 4 in 1988. During that time, we had the emergence of the 1990s and a new wave of gorier horror films and teen horror permeating the genre. Halloween would have to up the body count and make the deaths more vivid if Michael Myers were to survive in this market. A tag-on from the previous instalment is the mysterious presence of a man in black. We have no idea of the motivations behind this character, only that we know it's probably nothing positive. In its own convoluted for the sake of being convoluted way, we'll return to this character later as he's brought into the light. There are no creative titles this time around, just Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers in bold type on screen. Curse indicating to the well-versed horrorphiles among audiences that they're going to try and explain away Michael Myers and his motivations in this 4th sequel for the character. We have a narration from Paul Rudd, or Donald Pleasence's Loomis, depending on whether you're watching the theatrical or producer's cut of the film. There's really very little that tells the two versions apart, and neither is particularly any improvement on the other, giving audiences a little backstory on Myers and what he's done up to this point, in case newcomers to the series decide to start with part 6 in the series. Over a scene of a now teenage Jamie Lloyd, sadly Danielle Harris does not reprise the role she made her own. Instead, the filmmakers decided to recast another newcomer, J.C. Brandy, about to give birth in an underground chamber. People are performing rituals with the newborn baby and brandishing him with the thorn symbol, we'll come back to this, whilst keeping Jamie from seeing her baby. In an act of heroism, or most likely stupidity, one nurse decides to rescue the baby and reunite Jamie with her son before leading them to the exit. Only Michael discovers this treachery, creeping up on said nurse and impaling her head on a spike protruding from the wall. It's the first gory sign of the deaths to come in this instalment. Jamie and baby flee in a truck and Michael is in pursuit, eventually tracking Jamie down to a barn where Jamie has tricked Michael by leaving the baby in a bus station. Michael gets his revenge by brutally murdering Jamie, our only connection to the previous 2 instalments. It's next that we're introduced to another newcomer, Paul Rudd, who we discover is playing a grown-up Tommy Doyle, who Laurie Strode was babysitting in the very first film, in the first of a number of tenuous links back to the beginning of the franchise. He's first seen perving on a woman across the street, who we discover is one of the Strode family. What's most bizarre is how, given the town's reputation for a mass murderer who's still at large, the boy who actually met Michael Myers when he was young and was caught in the middle of the carnage is still living in Haddonfield, just across the street from the Myers' old house. Donald Pleasence reprises his role as Myers' psychiatrist Dr. Loomis in his final film before his death in early 1995. With over 200 screen credits to his name, Pleasence's legacy lives on, and he remains the only constantly solid character within the canon. Now retired, Loomis is visited by Dr. Terence Wynn, who encourages him to return to work at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, despite Loomis's protests that he's too old to return to Michael Myers. It's only when Loomis hears of recent killings that have all the hallmarks of a Myers massacre, including the death of Jamie Lloyd, that he tries to warn anyone who will listen of Myers' inevitable return. Loomis visits the Strode family, who are currently residing in the Myers' old house, to convince them that they're in danger and they will be Michael's next targets. But they're too late to leave, as Michael picks them off one by one, some in inventive ways, others so poorly edited that it's embarrassing. Tommy Doyle finds Jamie's baby and returns home with it to try and protect it, but this baby is part of the cult of Thorn that is trying to protect Myers. Michael apparently heard a voice when he was 6 years old that told him to kill his sister and the rest of his bloodline. The Man in Black's identity is revealed, and the film ends in a bloodbath with Michael overcoming the rest of the cult and seemingly dying at the hands of Tommy Doyle of all people, until Loomis re-enters the facility to check, and Myers is gone. By trying to give backstory and explain away Michael Myers, all the terror of this unknown, unstoppable force is dissipated. Despite there being a renewed sense of energy to this chapter in the Halloween series, the film gets too bogged down in nonsense mythology and traps itself to the point in which the producers decided they were making a ridiculous film. It's not surprising, therefore, to hear that the cast and crew have since dismissed it. In actual fact, this isn't the worst chapter in the series, but neither is it a series high. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up.
Take a chance on me.
Sorry. With the last two films in the canon, the filmmakers could quite easily have laid Michael Myers to rest and concluded the series, but the chance to have Jamie Lee Curtis reprise the character Laurie Strode on the 20th anniversary of John Carpenter's original in the strangely titled Halloween H2O was clearly too good to resist. Kevin Williamson, responsible for the Scream films in the 90s, is on executive producer duties here, and the young cast, ranging from a cameo from Joseph Gordon-Levitt to bigger starring roles from the likes of Josh Hartnett and Michelle Williams, bring a sense of youth and vitality back into the series. We're quick to learn that this film is set in the original Halloween timeline and ignores the events of the last three Halloween sequels and the Jamie Lloyd angle. Laurie Strode faked her own death and is now living a life in California as Josh Hartnett's mother and the head of a comprehensive school under the name Kerry Tate. We begin the film with an echo of the Chaudettes' Mr. Sandman, harking back nicely to 1981's Halloween 2, before quickly shifting to Langdon, Illinois, 2 days before Halloween, where Nancy Stevens reprises her role as Nurse Marion from the first two Halloween films. We learn that she still has case files of Michael Myers in her office and that she cared for Dr. Loomis until he passed away. A grungy-looking Michael Myers, played by a considerably less stocky actor, has come to Illinois to find paperwork on the whereabouts of Laurie Strode so he can finish what he started 20 years earlier. In an effective opening sequence, one of the series' best, Marion falls victim to Myers before the story proper begins. Steve Miner, director of both Friday the 13th Parts 2 and 3, is on directing duty here and does a solid job of evoking the horror of the first Halloween as well as updating the storytelling for 90s audiences. After the last few films have had poor musical scores, it's John Ottman and Marco Beltrami who update some of Carpenter's motifs for the score this time around, and it works well. The music reflects the more personal story in its longer chords and driving arrangement of John Carpenter's now 20-year-old main theme. There's plenty of strong set pieces in H2O, from the atmospheric bathroom sequence with the mother and daughter to the final showdown between Laurie and Michael, and this is one of the paciest of the series, at just over 80 minutes. It was also wise to ignore the storyline of parts 4 to 6 and return to the essence of what made the original Halloween so successful, namely getting Jamie Lee Curtis to return to the Scream Queen role that she made famous. There are lots of little surprising Easter eggs in the film, but none more effective than a cameo from Curtis's real-life mother and a Scream Queen in her own right, Janet Leigh from Psycho, playing Miss Tate's secretary at the school. There's a great exchange where Lee's Norma suggests to Curtis's Tate that it's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, to which Tate resignedly responds, "I've had my share," before we get to hear strings from Bernard Herrmann's legendary Psycho main theme. It's these moments alone that place this entry in the series higher than others. Kerry Tate is struggling to come to the terms with the fact that it's Halloween, 20 years to the day that her high school friends were picked off one by Myers, and she's convinced that Myers is still at large, much to the frustration and consequently strained relationship between Kerry and her son. Security is tight at the school until LL Cool J's security guard on the gate unwittingly lets Myers in so he can track down Laurie Strode one last time. The problem is Laurie believes her son has gone on an end-of-school trip until realising that he's still in the school grounds and prey to Myers. The kills are thankfully less brutal this time than they were in Halloween 6. This is more about building atmosphere, making it the most akin to the original Halloween out of all the sequels up to this point. The final confrontation between Laurie and Michael is a great way to cap off the film and should undoubtedly have been the series finale. It's a shame, therefore, that strong box office returns convinced the filmmakers that more Halloween sequels were required. Halloween H2O is certainly the most competent and entertaining of all the sequels to John Carpenter's classic, and a fitting 20th anniversary sequel, bringing the series back to its roots, whilst keeping modern audiences suitably entertained. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up.
Alrighty then.
And now for the series Trainwreck. Halloween H2O concluded in such a final way that audiences were convinced in 1998 that on the series' 20th anniversary, this was the final showdown between Laurie and Michael and the end of the franchise. Little did they know that producers were hell-bent on cashing in on the reality TV craze by resurrecting Michael Myers for a final time in the aptly named Halloween Resurrection. Rather nauseatingly referred to as the one with Busta Rhymes, we discover that Laurie wasn't in fact having a one-to-one with the real Michael Myers at the end of H2O, but a paramedic whom Michael strangled and placed his mask upon, after crushing his larynx, of course. Laurie, having killed an innocent man, finds herself down the end of a dark corridor in a sanitarium of her own. Gone is the heroic woman of the previous film. A ghost of this brave woman she was remains. For the sake of another cash grab sequel, the filmmakers have undone the great work achieved in the previous film. We're even treated to a poorly shot, made-for-TV style flashback sequence that shows Michael escaping from custody once again. So far, so infuriating, but now it's just insulting, as Jamie Lee Curtis gets a mere 10 minutes of screen time before meeting her fate at the hands of the real Michael. The film proper starts as Michael hands his knife to an inmate in the sanitarium, having killed his last victim, Laurie Strode, ending his reign of terror, until Busta Rhymes and Tyra Banks get a band of overacting teenagers to take part in an internet reality experiment where they must endure Halloween night in the old Myers house with hidden cameras. I bet you can't guess what's about to happen. This is lazy filmmaking and storytelling, and what makes it worse is that this film is directed by Halloween 2 director Rick Rosenthal. Whilst his first foray into the Halloween series is often regarded as one of the best of the series sequels, this film often comes last in critical rankings. The deaths are even ridiculously OTT, including an underground tunnel in which Myers impales one of the teens, and Michael decapitating one of the girls and letting her head roll down the stairs, to the horror of the rest of the group, who just believe these are really good effects. The biggest problem? Busta Rhymes. He's actually alright for the most part until he dresses as Michael Myers and Michael Myers gets bested by this idiot. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up.
That is one big pile of shit.
There's little left to say that hasn't already been said about this infuriating, lifeless entry in the series. This is the film that killed the franchise dead, despite a charred Michael in the autopsy room suddenly opening his eyes to give audiences one last jump scare. For one terrifying moment, we thought there'd be another entry in the series, and there would be, but it would be in the form of director Rob Zombie's reboot of the franchise. Following 2003's House of a Thousand Corpses and 2005's The Devil's Rejects, Rob Zombie decided to reboot the Halloween franchise, and, as expected, it's another mixed bag. Far too much time is afforded to giving background to a young Michael Myers and what possesses him to become this mass-murdering shape. Where John Carpenter played on subtlety and ambiguity in his presentation of the shape, here we see a clearly troubled young Michael as a member of an extremely dysfunctional white trash family, wearing a clown mask and toying with his pet rat and a knife in our first introduction to our antagonist. Meanwhile, his stepdad is perving on his daughter, and his mother and father are constantly swearing at each other. There's a lot of negativity and trouble from the outset, Zombie stressing here that it's no wonder Michael becomes the infamous killer that he does. Malcolm McDowell brings a grizzled interpretation to the character of Sam Loomis, with more interaction with the young Michael, and gives one of the better performances in the film, but sadly, he's no Donald Pleasance. Zombie ups the kills and the gore factor by 10 from the beginning. Young Michael's first kill comes 10 minutes in as he beats a school bully to death with a large tree branch. From this kill alone, we can tell that no expense is going to be spared in giving audiences a harsh, bloody reboot to the series, which takes no prisoners along the way and is definitely not for the faint of heart. What's frustrating is that in amongst the dead wood there is plenty to appreciate from Zombie's vision. The cinematography is often impressive, as is the score, utilising Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper and Nazareth's Love Hurts to great effect, whilst also evoking John Carpenter's signature theme in certain moments that add more gravitas to the storytelling. After a lengthy build-up in the first act, we get Michael on the rampage, and it's brutal. Michael attains his infamous mask from his sister's boyfriend, who brings it round to the Myers house before heading out and wears one from then on, keen to hide his identity even from his mother when she regularly comes to visit him in the sanitarium. Unlike the original, McDowell's Loomis now resigns himself to the fact that after 15 years of trying to get through to Michael, he has to concede to defeat, telling Michael he's giving up on him. It takes a corrupt sanitarium worker allowing his friend to come in and rape one of the female inmates for Michael to finally snap and break free. Enter the Strode family in Haddonfield on October the 31st. It's only taken nearly an hour of the film's runtime to get to this point. From here, much of the narrative plays out almost identically to Carpenter's original, down to the killing of Laurie's friend Linda and her boyfriend, but a change in this version is that Michael viciously kills Laurie's stepmother and father whilst Laurie is out babysitting. In a nice nod to Halloween's 4 and 5, Jamie Lloyd returns to the franchise. Well, Danielle Harris, this time playing the thankless role of Laurie's friend Annie, who has a run-in with Michael, and she's just one of the hugely irritating, over-exaggerated teenage stereotypes on offer in this reboot. It's Scout Taylor Compton's infuriating interpretation of Laurie Strode that stamps this film in negativity. From the first moment you see her, you're waiting for Michael to finish her off, which is hardly what you're looking for in a headstrong protagonist. She's no Jamie Lee Curtis, let's put it that way. As it turns out, all things considered, there are some well-executed kills, and it's an atmospheric slasher in part, but the second half of the film in particular is very dark, making it almost impossible to identify what's going on. Perhaps that's a good thing. You can see in part what Zombie was aiming for with this Halloween reboot, and it's certainly a step up in quality from the abysmal Halloween Resurrection, but Carpenter's original has absolutely nothing to worry about. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up.
Take a chance on me.
Sorry.
And so we're almost bang up to date with the Halloween franchise. The last film in our focus in this second part of our retrospective is the film that put the final nail in the coffin for the franchise and has left it dormant since its release in 2009. Zombie was quick to cash in on the success of his 2007 reboot by releasing a sequel that's excessively gory, ridiculously dark, and insanely nonsensical. Halloween 2 begins where the first concluded, with Laurie wandering the streets with a gun, assuming she's killed Michael, having shot him point blank in the head. We also get a confusing flashback to young Michael speaking with his mum in Smith's Grove Sanitarium about a dream he had involving both of them dressed in white with a white horse. Young Michael from the first film, played by Dave Fairch, doesn't return for the sequel. Instead, Chase Yannick takes on the role for a few flashback and cameo sequences. To readdress the white horse concept, Zombie opens the film philosophically with an excerpt from The Subconscious Psychosis of Dreams, which explains that the image of a white horse is linked to instinct, purity, and the drive of the physical body to release powerful and emotional forces, like rage, with ensuing chaos and destruction. It's an intriguing concept that's never really explained properly in the narrative, leaving audiences baffled throughout by the metaphor. Laurie is transported to hospital with fast jump cuts back to Haddonfield, police officers removing the dead bodies from the house to try and clear up the mess that Myers has made. The film is once again extremely dark in its cinematography, as a large proportion of the film's scenes are nighttime sets, one of which being a sequence of two corrupt officers transporting Michael's body to the coroner's office, with one of the men discussing necrophilia. It's like Zombie is deliberately setting up abhorrent characters who are immediate prey for Michael. Michael escapes from their custody as the truck rams straight into a cow, killing the driver outright, and Michael exits the truck and proceeds to cut off the passenger's head, showcasing the grisliest death in the Halloween franchise to date. That's only topped by Octavia Spencer's nurse, who faces a shocking death at the hands of Michael, who grunts with pleasure with every stab of the kitchen knife into her flesh. It's a gratuitous sequence which demonstrates a huge lack of understanding of Michael Myers on Zombie's part. Myers has never been this unnecessarily vicious on a random individual, and the scene is vile to watch. Making her escape from the hospital, Laurie eyes other members of hospital staff with their eyes gouged out on the stairwell and makes her escape before Michael catches up with her. From here, we're led to believe this is all one of Laurie's vivid nightmares, and Laurie is now living with her friend Annie and the town sheriff. She's even more obnoxious and frustrating to watch in her portrayal of a tortured Laurie this time around, and her interpretation of the character just doesn't work whatsoever. Zombie also appears to have performed a complete U-turn on McDowell's Loomis this time around. He's now walking around completely fine with no problem with his eyesight after his run-in with Michael at the end of the previous film. He's now a cocky bastard who gets agitated by everyone, a misogynist, and he's let the fame of Michael Myers and his resultant publications about Michael go to his head. Where he was one of the preceding film's saving graces, he is utterly unlikable in this instalment. There honestly is little to recommend this mess of a film. This is clearly Zombie realising that he can turn the violence up by 100 and put more of his artistic mark on the sequel, having already made a moderately successful reboot to the franchise, but it just doesn't work. Apart from one or two passable creative choices and the haunting orchestration of Nazareth's Love Hurts over the end scene and credits, this is further proof that Carpenter's vision should have never been interfered with. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, as they say. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up. So, there are our thoughts on the first 10 films in the Halloween franchise. What are your thoughts on the series? If you like this review and our review of the first 5 films in the franchise in part 1 of this retrospective, please subscribe to Crawford-Clark Close-Up for more. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can email us your suggestions for future reviews on the channel to crawfordclarkcloseup@gmail.com. Up next, we'll be reviewing David Gordon Green's 2018 sequel to John Carpenter's Halloween, and giving you the Crawford-Clark Close-Up final ranking of all 11 Halloween films to date. Look out for both of these videos this October 31st to conclude our first Halloween horror season. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and until next time, that's a wrap.